A first-class ticket should guarantee you comfort, respect, and dignity, not humiliation at 35,000 feet. But what happens when the very people paid to protect your experience become the source of your deepest wound? Marcus and Maya Carter, twin tech visionaries who had conquered Silicon Valley before turning 30, boarded Global Sky Airways Flight 74 expecting celebration. Instead, they encountered Helen Whitmore, a veteran flight attendant who believed she could decide who truly belonged in first class. What followed was not just neglect, it was targeted disdain, culminating in words so venomous they stunned an entire cabin into silence. But here's the question. What happens when the passengers she tried to diminish were far more powerful than she could imagine? What happens when grace meets prejudice, and justice answers in real time at cruising altitude? This isn't just the story of a flight gone wrong. It's about character, dignity, and the high price of prejudice. And by the end, you'll see why this moment became a turning point, not only for the Carters, but for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this story is one you won't want to miss. Marcus Carter sat in the corner of the Global Sky Airways first-class lounge at JFK, his back straight, his eyes locked on the numbers scrolling across his tablet. To anyone watching, he looked calm, almost stoic, but inside his mind was a restless stream of analysis, projected earnings, partnership models, upcoming expansions. That was Marcus, always the strategist, always the quiet anchor. Across from him, Maya Carter leaned back in her chair, phone pressed lightly against her ear, her laughter warm and melodic. She was in the middle of persuading yet another European investor to consider their next project. She wasn't reading from a pitch deck. She didn't need one. Her voice, her charisma, her certainty it was enough. That was Maya, visionary, the face and fire of Luminar Technologies. Together, they were unstoppable. At just 27, the twins had done the impossible, built an AI logistics platform from their shared dorm room, turned it into a billion-dollar powerhouse, and recently sold it to a French conglomerate for a life-changing sum. This flight to Paris was not just business. It was their victory lap, a well-earned celebration after 18 months of grueling negotiations. The lounge around them buzzed softly, the clink of champagne flutes, the rustle of designer coats, the muted conversations of travelers used to existing in rarefied air. But even here, Marcus and Maya stood out. Two young black entrepreneurs in a space where they were still, far too often, anomalies. They wore their success without arrogance, but with a quiet dignity that drew glances, some admiring, some puzzled, some less welcoming. They were used to that. They carried themselves as if the room already belonged to them. When the boarding call finally came, Marcus closed his tablet with deliberate precision. Maya ended her call with a gracious promise to follow up once we land in Paris. They gathered their sleek carry-ons and walked toward the gate. The jet bridge was lined with gold-trimmed posters proclaiming Global Sky Airways, redefining luxury above the clouds, a tagline promising perfection, attentiveness, equality of service. The Carters exchanged a brief, amused glance. Promises, they knew, were easy. Delivery was harder. Stepping onto the aircraft felt like crossing into a different world. The lighting was soft, the cabin hushed. Each seat was a private pod upholstered in cream leather and polished dark wood. There was the faint aroma of fresh orchids and citrus, a sanctuary in the sky. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to exhale, to feel the thrill of reward. This was what success looked like, At the doorway, a flight attendant in her mid-30s greeted a silver-haired businessman ahead of them. Her smile was broad, her voice warm and deferential. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Langston. Can I offer you champagne to start your evening?" The man chuckled and accepted. His coat was whisked away as if by magic. Every detail spoke of hospitality. Then it was their turn. A woman in her early 50s stepped forward. Uniform immaculate, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Her name tag read Helen Whitmore, purser. She looked at their tickets, then at their faces. For a flicker of a second, something crossed her expression: annoyance, disbelief, perhaps contempt, before it smoothed into a blank mask. "Seats 2A and 2B, she said curtly, her hand gesturing vaguely to the left. No welcome aboard, no offer of champagne, no smile, just dismissal. Marcus felt it immediately, a chill slipping under the luxury. Maya's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing. Instead, she and her brother moved quietly down the aisle, past rows of travelers already basking in the warmth of Helen's attentions. They reached their pods, spacious, magnificent, pillows plump, blankets folded with military precision, an amenity kit from a French luxury brand waiting on the side table. By every measure, paradise. And yet a subtle dissonance hung in the air, like a sour note in a symphony. Luxury meant nothing when respect was absent. Maya sank into her seat and fastened her belt. She glanced at Marcus, and in that silent sibling language they had perfected over years, she asked the question without words. Did you catch that he gave the smallest nod? He had caught it. They both had. The first move had been made, subtle but unmistakable. Helen moved through the cabin with the air of ownership. She hovered over Mr. Langston, laughing softly, adjusting his cashmere throw. She leaned down to whisper to the woman in 3C, calling her by name, offering extra pillows. She stopped at every row, every seat, every row but theirs. When she reached 2A and 2B, her gaze slid over them as if they were part of the upholstery, as if the seats were empty, invisible. Marcus raised a hand slightly, polite, an easy smile on his lips. She was close enough to see. She turned her body deliberately away and began chatting with the passenger across the aisle. Maya's jaw tightened. Marcus lowered his hands slowly. The game had begun. The engines roared to life, the great machine trembling as it prepared to lift them into the night sky. The safety video played on glossy high-definition screens, showing smiling, diverse passengers being pampered by attentive crew. Marcus watched it with grim irony. Promises, again. Easy promises. As the jet broke through the clouds, New York's lights vanishing beneath them, Maya whispered, "It never is just us." Her voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. Marcus nodded, his face unreadable. "No," he replied. "It never is." The curtain closed across the cabin entrance. The sanctuary of first class was sealed. And though the champagne corks would soon pop and the air would fill with laughter, oh, Marcus and Maya Carter knew the evening was already set on a different course. This flight was meant to be their celebration. Instead, it was about to become a battleground. The plane climbed steadily through the night sky, the city falling away beneath them like a galaxy scattered across velvet. In the hush of first class, the hum of the engines was softened by layers of luxury. For most passengers, it was an oasis, a rare world where time slowed, and every need was anticipated before it was spoken. For Marcus and Maya, however, it was already something else, a test, an invisible contest of will and dignity, The first-class cabin was stunning. Cream-colored pods glowed under amber lights. Each pod was angled toward privacy, but open enough for subtle glances between strangers. The air smelled faintly of citrus and orchids, an intentional blend meant to calm. White linen napkins were folded perfectly on the tray tables. A young couple in 3A and 3B clinked glasses of champagne, smiling as though they were in a commercial. The older man in 1A flipped through the Financial Times, occasionally sipping amber whiskey from a crystal glass. Every detail screamed exclusivity. Every detail except the silence around seats 2A and 2B. Helen Whitmore strolled down the aisle with a posture that belonged more to a queen than a servant. She spoke to passengers by name, her tone sweet as honey. "Mr. Langston, would you care for another splash of champagne?" she asked. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'll have your blanket warmed for you." The cabin was her stage, and she played her role with ease, except when she approached Marcus and Maya. Then she became blind. Marcus tried again. He caught Helen's eye as she drew near. He didn't demand. He simply lifted 2 fingers slightly from the armrest, a small, polite gesture. She looked at him, her gaze sliding across his face, then shifted to the man across the aisle. "Mr. Harrington." "I'll prepare your sparkling water with lemon," she said warmly, leaning so close to the man that Marcus could smell the sharp bite of her perfume. Not a word for him, not a glance for Maya. She pivoted and walked away. Marcus lowered his hand. His face remained composed, but inside, a flicker of heat pressed against his ribs. He inhaled slowly, willing it back into place. Getting angry was exactly what she wanted. It would give her a weapon, an excuse to label him the stereotype she already carried in her head. He wouldn't give her that satisfaction. He looked over at Maya. Her eyes told him everything. Fury restrained behind stillness. Maya had dealt with this her whole life. The venture capitalists who asked if she was the assistant. The engineers who assumed her code was written by someone else. The boardroom stares that measured her skin before her intelligence. She was tired. Tired of asking for the dignity that others received freely. Tired of swallowing indignities so small they barely registered to outsiders, but carved deep grooves inside her. Her chest rose with a slow breath. "We wait," she mouthed. The ritual of first-class service began. A second attendant, Clara Nguyen, emerged from the galley. She was younger, in her 20s, with dark hair tucked neatly into her cap. She seemed eager, attentive, her smile genuine. Clara moved down the starboard side of the cabin, offering hot towels with silver tongs. Her tone was bright, respectful. Marcus watched her, silently willing her to cross over to their side. She didn't. Helen had taken control of the port side, their side. She distributed towels with exaggerated ceremony, bowing slightly as she presented each passenger with the steaming cloth. "To Mr. Langston," she said, "a warm towel to refresh you before dinner. To the woman in 3C, for your comfort, Mrs. Moreau." But when she reached row 2, she angled her body toward the opposite aisle, leaning across Marcus and Maya as if they were empty space. "Here you go, sir," she said to the man in 2D, handing him his towel with a warm smile. Then she moved on. The tongs clicked closed. The basket remained full, but not for them. Marcus chuckled softly, the sound bitter and incredulous. "Are we invisible?" he whispered. Maya didn't smile. Her gaze stayed fixed on Helen's retreating back. "It's a tactic," she murmured. "Make us feel like intruders. Make us question if we belong here." She reached for her phone, then hesitated, letting it fall back into her lap. "If we react, we lose." The drink service followed. Again. Helen began at the front, addressing passengers with a familiarity that suggested long practice. Mr. Langston, the Macallan. 18. As usual, she asked. Already pouring. Mrs. Moreau. Another glass of Sauvignon Blanc. Her voice was velvet, her service impeccable. She reached row 2 and paused, for a heartbeat. Marcus thought she might finally acknowledge them. Instead, she leaned over his seat back, her shoulder nearly brushing his, to address the woman in 3C behind him. "Another refill for you, Mrs. Moreau," she asked cheerfully. She did not glance at Marcus, did not glance at Maya. Her notepad hovered inches from his face, but her pen never moved for him. She turned and walked away. Marcus's jaw flexed. His hand rested on the armrest, tightening, then loosening. "Excuse me, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice calm but firm. She stopped, turned, her face expressionless. "Yes," she said. "My sister and I would like to order drinks," Marcus said evenly. "It seems we've been missed." The words carried no anger, only the measured authority of someone who had led boardrooms and closed deals worth millions. Helen's lips tightened. Her hand still held the notepad, but she didn't write. "Drinks will be taken with meal service," she said coolly. "You can order then." And she walked away. The air thickened. Conversations faltered. Every passenger in the intimate cabin had heard. Heads turned discreetly, some sympathetic, some awkward, some pretending not to notice. Mr. Langston in 1A met Marcus's eyes, gave a small shrug, a flicker of apology. He saw it. He knew it was wrong, but he did nothing. 10 minutes later, crystal glasses clinked throughout the cabin. Champagne foamed. Ice cubes cracked in whiskey tumblers. The air filled with the delicate pop of corks, the symphony of indulgence. At 2A and 2B, their trays remained bare. The silence there was no longer subtle. It was glaring. Maya leaned toward her brother. "She's daring us," she said. "She wants us to snap, so she can call us difficult, or worse." She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against her thighs to ground herself. "We won't give her that." Marcus nodded. "No," he said quietly. "We get strategic. We document." He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, opened the Notes app, and began typing. 10:42 p. Moi. EST. Flight GS-74 departs. 11:05 p. Moi. Hot towel service skipped at 2A and 2B. 11:15 p. Mum. Drink orders taken. Purser Whitmore skips 2A and 2B. 11:18 p. Mum. Direct request made denied. 11:25 p. Mum. All other passengers served beverages except us. Line by line, moment by moment, the evidence formed. Maya watched him, pride and sorrow mingling. They had built a company by turning data into power. Tonight, they would do the same. Helen Whitmore thought she was wielding authority. She didn't realize she was writing her own indictment, one act at a time. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants prepared for dinner service. Helen walked past them again, her smile flashing at Mr. Langston. She didn't glance left, didn't glance at Marcus, didn't glance at Maya. The chill around their seats deepened. It wasn't just neglect now. It was contempt. And contempt, Maya knew, had a way of escalating. She folded her arms and leaned back, her eyes on the ceiling. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself. Marcus heard. He closed his phone and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning." Dinner service had not yet begun, but the fracture lines in the cabin were widening, invisible to some, glaring to others. Marcus and Maya sat in silence. their trays still empty, their patience stretched thin yet carefully held. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside both twins, a storm gathered quiet, calculating, and unwilling to be provoked into something rash. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his eyes scanning the cabin, not with anger, but with the detached precision of an analyst. He noted the rhythm of Helen's movements, how she pivoted gracefully toward some passengers and deliberately away from others. She had the practiced smile of someone who had done this for decades, but the cracks were visible. Every time her gaze skipped them, every time her steps quickened to avoid their row. Marcus saw a pattern, and patterns were his domain. He was building a case, even if she thought she was merely building distance. Maya, meanwhile, stared at the screen in front of her, the in-flight entertainment offering a selection of movies she could not bring herself to play. Her reflection in the black glass stared back at her, poised, elegant, unruffled on the outside. But inside, memories stirred. She thought of the venture pitch she'd made 2 years earlier, standing in a glass conference room in Palo Alto. She'd laid out projections, growth metrics, and a vision that had silenced the room. When she finished, the lead investor had smiled and asked, "And who's the real CEO here?" "Your brother." The words had stung, not just because of the dismissal, but because Marcus had been sitting right there, watching her brilliance erased in a single assumption. That same feeling prickled now, the same unspoken suggestion. "You don't belong here. Not in this room. Not in this cabin." Maya clenched her jaw and closed her eyes briefly. She whispered inwardly, "Not today. You've fought bigger battles than this. Stay steady." Helen's voice floated through the cabin. "Another blanket. Mr. Harrington." "Of course." The sound was sugar-sweet, but every syllable carried a quiet sting when compared to the silence she wrapped around the Carters. Passengers in first class shifted in their seats, some deliberately avoiding eye contact with the twins. The bystander effect was powerful in closed spaces. Everyone saw. Few were willing to act. Claire and Guyon reappeared, balancing a tray of drinks for the opposite side of the cabin. Her movements were careful, almost deferential, as though she knew the balance of power in the aisle did not belong to her. She met Maya's eyes briefly, just for a second. It was fleeting, but it carried something apology, maybe even unease. Clara placed a glass of wine in front of Mrs. Moreau, nodded politely, and moved back toward the galley. She had seen. She wasn't blind, but youth and inexperience bound her hands. Marcus picked up his phone again, fingers flying across the screen. Each note was time-stamped, each observation logged with surgical precision. He wasn't just recording neglect. He was documenting contempt. "You're building a file," Maya murmured, her voice low enough to be drowned by the hum of the engines. Marcus nodded once. "We use what we know. Data is neutral. But when truth is revealed through data, it becomes undeniable." His tone was steady, but his chest felt tight. He hated that it had come to this, that after years of fighting to prove they belonged in boardrooms, in contracts, in billion-dollar negotiations, they still had to prove they belonged in a seat they had paid for. Helen passed again, her perfume trailing in the air, sharp and deliberate. She stopped at 2D, asking with a flourish if the passenger would like his jacket pressed. Marcus and Maya could feel the weight of her proximity, the almost theatrical way she leaned across the aisle to avoid even glancing left. Maya's knuckles whitened as she tightened her grip on the armrest. She wanted to speak. She wanted to demand recognition, to puncture the bubble of invisibility Helen had cast around them. But she swallowed it down. If she spoke now, it would become her anger instead of Helen's injustice. Her mind whispered two competing voices. One said, "Don't let her get away with it. You've earned this seat, this respect." The other said, "Wait. Don't give her the scene she wants." Maya's chest rose with a long breath, the war inside her raging quietly, unseen by the others but burning hot all the same. The menu distribution came next. Helen handed each leather-bound booklet with a personal touch. "For you, Mr. Langston. For you, Mrs. Moreau. Please enjoy our chef's selections." When she reached row 2, she did not pause. She dropped the menus onto the side tables of Marcus and Maya without a word, without a glance, while they were looking away. By the time Maya turned, the leather cover was already sitting there like a silent insult. She pressed her lips together, a sharp exhale escaping through her nose. Marcus looked at her, his eyes calm, but filled with the same frustration. They didn't need to speak. They both understood. It was no longer subtle. It was deliberate. The cabin around them carried on. "Mr. Langston chuckled at something Helen had said. "Mrs. Moreau complimented the attentiveness. The Carters sat in their silence, surrounded by the performance of hospitality, yet denied its touch. The irony was suffocating. Global Sky Airways promised redefining luxury above the clouds. For Marcus and Maya, luxury was being redefined as endurance. "Let them play their game," Marcus said quietly. "We'll play ours." His voice was low, even, but Maya heard the steel beneath it. He wasn't passive. He was patient, and patience, in his hands, was not weakness. It was strategy. Maya nodded, though her stomach churned. She turned the menu over, scanning the options with detached eyes. Pan-seared halibut, filet mignon, risotto with truffle oil, words that promised delight, though she already knew those promises would not extend to her. She remembered their parents' words, spoken long ago in their cramped apartment in Brooklyn. "Character is the only thing they can't take from you," their mother had said. "But you can give it away if you're not careful. Tonight." Those words sat heavy in her chest. She would not give hers away. Not to Helen, not to anyone. Time moved slowly in the cocoon of the cabin. Outside, the Atlantic stretched endless and black. Inside, the cracks widened further, unseen by the crew who thought they controlled the stage. The Carters knew better. They were strategists, survivors, innovators. They knew how to turn cracks into leverage. They just needed the right moment. Helen returned, her notepad poised at last for meal orders. Her face was a mask of professional reluctance, as though the task of acknowledging Marcus and Maya was an unpleasant chore. She stopped at their row, eyes fixed just above Marcus's shoulder. "Your choices," she said flatly. No warmth, no welcome, just the barest acknowledgement that they existed. Maya lifted her chin slightly, her voice calm and even. "The halibut, please." Marcus followed, his tone steady. "Filet mignon, medium rare." Helen scribbled without looking at them. "And drinks?" she asked, her words laced with condescension, as if it were generosity to even inquire. "Sparkling water with lime," Maya said. "The same," Marcus added. Helen's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Of course," she said, before pivoting away. Maya exhaled, the tension settling deeper into her shoulders. Marcus adjusted his cufflink, his face unreadable. Around them, glasses were refilled, laughter rose, and the hum of privilege filled the air. But in seats 2A and 2B, silence reigned. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of endurance. A silence sharpened into a weapon, waiting for the right strike. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, a signal that dinner service was about to begin. Around Marcus and Maya, a subtle excitement stirred. First-class meals on Global Sky were marketed as fine dining above the clouds-crafted menus, perfectly paired wines, presentation worthy of a Michelin table. It was supposed to be one of the highlights of the journey. Tonight, it was about to become something else entirely. Helen emerged from the galley like a conductor readying her orchestra. The younger attendant, Clara, trailed behind her, balancing trays with the careful nervousness of someone still finding her rhythm. Together, they began the procession of service. The white linen tablecloths came first. Helen placed them on each passenger's tray with slow elegance, smoothing out wrinkles with her palms, offering small comments along the way. "For you, Mr. Langston. So crisp tonight. To Mr. Harrington. Perfectly set, just as you like it." The cabin was bathed in her honeyed voice, and then came row 2. Marcus and Maya's trays remained bare, their tablecloths absent. Helen walked past, her arms full of folded linens, her eyes trained on anywhere but their row. She leaned instead across the aisle to unfold a cloth in front of the man in 2D, spreading it carefully as if she were preparing a private dining table at a 5-star restaurant. Clara glanced back at the twins, hesitation flickering in her eyes. For the briefest moment, she looked as though she might cross over, might step in. But Helen's presence loomed behind her, and Clara quickly moved on. Marcus sat still, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His expression was calm, almost detached, but his eyes told a different story, sharp, observing, recording. Maya shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening. The insult was no longer subtle. It was spectacle. 10 long minutes passed before Helen returned with their linens. No flourish, no words. Just a quiet thud as she dropped the folded cloths onto their trays without unfolding them. It was not service. It was dismissal. Maya slowly spread her own linen across the tray, her fingers smoothing it out with deliberate care. She did not look up at Helen. She would not give her the satisfaction of reaction. The appetizers followed. Marcus watched as delicate plates of smoked salmon with dill sauce were placed in front of Mr. Langston and Mrs. Moreau. Each dish came with a description, almost theatrical. "The dill is especially fragrant tonight. You'll enjoy it," Helen cooed. Glasses were refilled, napkins were adjusted, smiles exchanged. When at last their plates arrived, they came late and without ceremony. Helen set them down with a dull clatter. No eye contact, no explanation. Marcus's appetizer was lukewarm. Maya's halibut starter was overcooked, the edges dry and curling. Both plates looked as though they had been waiting unattended in the galley, forgotten until the last possible moment. Marcus cut a small piece of his appetizer with careful precision. He placed it in his mouth, chewed once, then set his fork down. "Cold," he said quietly. Maya didn't bother to taste hers. She picked at the dry fish with her fork. Her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. The other passengers pretended not to notice, though several eyes darted toward the twins' trays. The tension in the air was undeniable now. Something was happening, something ugly, but silence ruled the cabin. Silence and complicity. The main course was the breaking point. Helen returned, her notepad poised, her expression stiff. "Your selections?" she asked. Maya's voice was steady. "The halibut, please." Marcus followed. "The filet mignon, medium rare." Helen scribbled briefly, nodded without acknowledgement, and moved on. When the meals finally arrived, the differences were stark. Mr. Langston's halibut was presented with flourish, steam rising from the perfectly seared surface, the dill sauce poured table-side with a smile. Our chef recommends it this way, Helen said warmly. Mrs. Moreau's chicken was served tender and fragrant, with a side of roasted vegetables that gleamed with butter. Maya's halibut was placed in front of her without a word. The flesh was dry, overcooked. The sauce congealed around the edges. The presentation was sloppy, as though someone had tossed it onto the plate in haste. Marcus's filet mignon was worse. He had ordered medium rare, expecting the pink center and tenderness promised by the menu. Instead, when he cut into it, the steak was gray all the way through, cooked to the point of ruin. It was tough, dry, and flavorless. He placed his knife and fork down slowly, deliberately. He did not sigh. He did not speak. He simply waited. Helen walked past 4 times as she cleared plates, refilled wine glasses, adjusted linens. Each time, her eyes slid past Marcus's untouched steak as if it were invisible. Each time, she refused to acknowledge him. The silence grew heavy. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably. They could see the charade now. It was not a mistake. It was a performance, a deliberate show of contempt. Maya pressed the call button above her seat. A soft chime lit the blue light overhead. They waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Helen remained at the front of the cabin, chatting with Clara. The light above their row shone, ignored. Maya pressed the button again. This time, Helen turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. She continued her conversation. The light stayed on. 5 minutes passed. 10. Maya pressed it a third time. Finally, Helen walked over, her arms crossed, her lips curled into a smirk. Is there a problem? She asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Maya looked up, her voice quiet but razor sharp. Yes, there is. My brother's steak is inedible. We've been ignored, dismissed, and treated with contempt since the moment we boarded this plane. The words hung in the air like a blade. The cabin went silent. Forks froze in midair. Heads turned. Helen's smile cracked. The mask slipped. Her eyes hardened, her voice lowering into something menacing. I am the head purser on this flight. I decide the pace of service in my cabin. If you are unhappy, you can file a complaint when we land. Marcus's voice cut in, firm and steady. We are unhappy now. We are paying first-class passengers who deserve the same service as everyone else. What we are receiving is discrimination. The word landed like a spark in dry tinder. Helen's composure shattered. Her voice rose, sharp and venomous. How dare you? I am treating you exactly as you deserve. I don't know how you people manage to afford these tickets, whether some discount program or some... She stopped herself, but the poison lingered in the air. The implication was clear. Her final words sealed it. This is a first-class cabin, not the back of the bus. Now eat your food or don't. I have actual paying customers to attend to. A collective gasp swept the cabin. Mr. Langston's newspaper slid from his hands. Mrs. Moreau covered her mouth in shock. Even Clara froze at the galley entrance, her face pale. There was no longer subtext. It was text. Bold, underlined, and unmistakable. Maya's eyes were cold fire. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her calm was sharper than any scream. Thank you, Helen, she said evenly. You've just told us everything we needed to know. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The phone in Maya's hand felt heavier than it should. It wasn't just a device anymore. It was a key, a weapon, a lifeline. She turned it slowly between her fingers, her eyes fixed on Helen, who stood just inches away, arms still crossed, lips twisted in disdain. Around them, the cabin was frozen. The hum of the engines was the only sound, a steady backdrop to the silence that had swallowed the luxury of first class. Helen smirked. "What are you going to do, tweet about it?" Her voice was sharp, mocking, as if the very idea of accountability was a joke to her. "Go ahead. We have a whole department for people like you." The words dripped like acid, casual but laced with venom. Maya didn't answer. She unlocked her phone with a flick of her thumb. Her movements were calm, measured, deliberate, the very opposite of the fury that churned beneath her skin. She navigated quickly to her favorites list. At the top was a single name, Richard Lawson. Helen glanced at the screen and scoffed. "Calling a friend. That's cute." She straightened her jacket as if to punctuate her authority. "You'll find out soon enough who runs this cabin." Marcus leaned forward in his seat, his eyes locked on Helen. His voice carried the weight of steel wrapped in velvet. "And you'll find out who runs the company that owns this airline." Helen blinked, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face before she smoothed it over. But it was too late. The crack in her confidence was visible now. Maya pressed the call button on her phone. The satellite Wi-Fi caught instantly, the connection humming through the air. A moment later, a deep, steady voice answered, "Maya." The calm authority in that single word filled the cabin. Passengers who hadn't been listening leaned forward now. Helen stiffened, her smirk faltering. "Richard," Maya said, her tone calm, precise. "I'm so sorry to bother you during the evening. Marcus and I are on Global Sky Flight 74 to Paris. We've had a situation." She began to outline the events, her voice steady and factual, as if reading from the notes Marcus had been keeping. She described the ignored greetings, the skipped hot towels, the denied drink service. She explained how her brother's meal had been deliberately ruined, how their call button had been ignored, how the purser had dismissed their concerns with open contempt. And then she recited Helen's final words, each one landing with surgical precision. "I don't know how you people afforded these tickets. This is first class, not the back of the bus." The words hung in the air again, now repeated for everyone to hear. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some closing their eyes, some staring at Helen with open disgust. The silence was no longer complicity. It was condemnation. Before Helen could speak, a man in 1A rose from his seat. He was tall, silver-haired, with the careful movements of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. He walked toward Maya, his face solemn. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently. "My name is Thomas Bennett. I've been sitting here the entire flight. I've witnessed everything you've described. If your contact needs confirmation, I'll be glad to provide it." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and handed it to her. The embossed letters read Thomas Bennett, attorney at law, retired. Maya accepted it with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett." She lifted the phone slightly. "Richard, you heard that." On the other end, Richard Lawson's voice was silent for a long moment. That silence was more powerful than any outburst. It was the silence of a man who was deciding the fate of everyone involved, and whose decisions carried consequences measured in millions. Finally, his voice came through, crisp and commanding. "Put her on the phone." Helen's face drained of color. She stepped back, her hands tightening against her arms. "Excuse me." Maya held out the phone. "Richard would like to speak with you." Helen shook her head. "No, absolutely not. I don't know who this man thinks he is." "She refuses," Maya said calmly into the phone. "It doesn't matter," Richard replied. His voice was louder now, audible to those nearest the row. "The captain of that flight is Daniel Price. A good man. I'm calling him on the cockpit line right now. Do not move. This will be resolved in minutes." The line went dead. Helen stared at the phone in Maya's hand as if it were a loaded gun. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Around her, the passengers were no longer pretending. They were watching openly, some shaking their heads, others whispering. The atmosphere had shifted. She was no longer in control of the cabin. 2 minutes later, the curtain to the cockpit opened. Captain Daniel Price stepped into the cabin. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that radiated authority. His silver hair caught the soft light, his uniform pressed with military precision. He did not smile. His eyes scanned the cabin, taking in the scene in seconds. They landed on Marcus and Maya, calm but resolute in their seats. Then they shifted to Helen, who looked pale and suddenly very small. "Miss Whitmore," the captain said, his voice firm, commanding. "A word. In the galley. Now." Helen opened her mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. Her legs moved stiffly as she followed him, disappearing behind the curtain. The passengers leaned back, pretending to return to their meals. But no one was fooled. The cabin was electric with curiosity. Through the thin barrier of the curtain, muffled voices carried the captain's low, furious growl, Helen's high, desperate pleas, the rhythm of authority and collapse. It lasted 5 minutes, though to the passengers it felt longer. When the curtain finally parted, Captain Price emerged alone. His face was stern, but his eyes carried something else, deep regret, perhaps even shame. He walked directly to Marcus and Maya. He bent slightly, lowering his voice but ensuring everyone around could hear. "Mr. Carter, Miss Carter, on behalf of Global Sky Airways, and on a personal level, I am horrified by what you've endured on my aircraft. There are no excuses for the treatment you've received. It is an embarrassment to this airline and to every crew member who wears this uniform. Please accept my most sincere apologies." Marcus nodded once, his voice gracious but firm. "Thank you, Captain. Miss Whitmore," the captain continued, his voice rising slightly, "has been relieved of her duties. She will not return to the cabin. She will be confined to the crew rest area for the remainder of this flight and will be met by corporate security upon our arrival in Paris. Her employment with Global Sky Airways is terminated. Effective immediately." The words landed like thunder. Terminated. Fired in midair. The passengers glanced at one another, disbelief etched on their faces. Some whispered, others simply stared. It was unprecedented. The captain straightened, addressing the entire cabin now. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Please enjoy the remainder of your flight." With that, he turned and returned to the cockpit. The curtain closed again. The cabin remained silent for several long seconds, as though no one quite knew how to resume normalcy after what had just happened. Then Clara emerged from the galley, her hands trembling slightly as she approached Marcus and Maya. Her voice was soft, tentative. "Mr. Carter, Miss Carter, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to step in. She was my supervisor, and—" Her words faltered. Marcus offered her a kind smile. "It's not your fault. Clara, we understand. We'll just take that sparkling water with lime now, if you don't mind." Clara's relief was visible. She nodded quickly and hurried to the galley. Maya leaned back in her seat, her shoulders finally easing, though her expression remained tight. She glanced at Marcus. "We didn't win, she whispered. Marcus tilted his head. No, but we didn't lose either. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. It wasn't victory, it was survival. And survival, she knew, was its own kind of triumph. For the first time since boarding, there was quiet around Marcus and Maya that didn't feel hostile. The weight that had pressed on their shoulders seemed to shift, though it did not fully lift. Helen Whitmore was gone, confined to the crew rest quarters, but her presence lingered like smoke after a fire. The cabin had witnessed her words. The passengers had heard the venom spill from her mouth. And now, everyone sat with the awareness that they had been in the middle of something far larger than just dinner service. Clara returned with 2 glasses of sparkling water garnished with lime. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the Carter's trays. "Here you are," she said softly. Her voice carried both apology and reverence, as though she wanted the simple act of serving water to undo hours of cruelty. Marcus lifted his glass, his expression calm. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but warm enough to ease her tension. Maya nodded politely, offering Clara the smallest smile. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was a gesture of grace. Clara retreated quickly, glancing back once as though to reassure herself they were all right. Around them, passengers were resuming their meals with forced casualness. Crystal glasses clinked, forks moved against porcelain, but the atmosphere was changed. Some passengers stole glances at the twins, their expressions a mixture of sympathy, respect, and unease. Mr. Langston in 1A raised his glass slightly in their direction, a wordless gesture of solidarity. Mrs. Moreau looked as though she wanted to say something, but kept her eyes lowered, choosing silence over involvement. Maya sipped her water and leaned closer to her brother. "Do you realize what just happened?" she asked quietly. Marcus tilted his head. "Helen lost her career in 5 minutes. "Not just that," Maya replied. "Richard didn't just back us up. He called the captain directly. Do you understand how rare that is? He bypassed every protocol in the book." Her voice dropped further. "That wasn't just support. That was a message. To the airline. To everyone." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, his mind already moving beyond the cabin. "You're right," he murmured. "This isn't staying here. When we land, it won't just be an internal report. It'll be a storm." Maya leaned back, her gaze fixed on the dark window beside her. Paris was still hours away, but the turbulence she felt wasn't in the sky. It was in the unseen currents of power, the kind that rippled through boardrooms and headlines. She had the sinking sense that this flight, meant to be a quiet victory lap, had become something much larger. From the crew rest area came no sound, but the thought of Helen sitting alone in that cramped, windowless space was almost tangible. 20 years of authority, gone in minutes. Maya should have felt vindicated, but instead she felt a hollow ache. Racism was never about a single person. Helen was a symptom of something larger, something far harder to dismantle. Removing her was justice. Yes, but it wasn't victory. The cabin lights dimmed further as the meal service wound down. Some passengers reclined their seats, preparing to sleep through the transatlantic night. Others pulled out laptops or watched movies. The illusion of normalcy crept back, but beneath it, the tension still hummed. Marcus reached for his phone again. His notes were meticulous, every slight document with timestamps. He scrolled back through them, the clean list of observations like a case file ready for court. He considered adding more, but something stopped him. Slowly, he closed the app. "You're done," Maya asked softly. "For now," he said. "We've already built the record. The rest will take care of itself." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. He was right. They had done their part. But her mind kept circling back to Richard. What was he doing now? What calls were being made while they crossed the ocean? The thought both comforted and unsettled her. Richard Lawson was a man whose influence stretched further than most governments. His support was a shield, but it was also a spotlight. When he moved, people noticed. And this time, he had moved because of them. 2 hours later, while most of first class slept under cashmere blankets, Maya stirred awake from a restless doze. She reached for her phone out of habit. A single new message glowed on the screen. It was from Richard. Handled. Rest easy. I'll speak with both of you in Paris. Maya stared at the words for a long moment. Handled. What did that mean exactly? Was it limited to Helen's dismissal? Or had the ripple already reached the airline's executive offices? She imagined CEOs being woken in the middle of the night, emergency calls buzzing across time zones. A problem at 35,000 feet had become a crisis in boardrooms on the ground. She showed Marcus the message. He read it silently, then set the phone down. "We'll find out soon enough," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes betrayed the calculation at work in his mind. He was already preparing for whatever awaited them in Paris. The hours stretched on, the Atlantic rolling unseen beneath them. The cabin was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional clink of glasses or the shuffle of passengers adjusting in their seats. But the silence felt different now charged, like the air before a storm. Maya drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams fractured by flashes of memory. Helen's voice dripping with contempt. Richard's calm authority over the phone, the captain's apology echoing like thunder. When she opened her eyes again, the faint gray of dawn was brushing the horizon outside the window. Paris was drawing near. Breakfast service began quietly. This time, Clara herself approached the twins with trays, her hands steady, her smile genuine. She laid their meals down with care, her voice soft but clear. "For you, Miss Carter. For you, Mr. Carter." She lingered a second longer, as if waiting for some sign of acceptance. Maya gave her a small nod. "Thank you, Clara." The attendant's shoulders relaxed as though a weight had lifted. She moved on, but not before glancing back once, her expression resolute. She had seen enough on this flight to shape her own understanding of right and wrong. As Marcus ate quietly, Maya pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. Her mind was already racing ahead, beyond landing, beyond customs, to what awaited them outside the airport. "Do you think the press will know?" she asked suddenly. Marcus paused. "Not unless Richard wants them to." She nodded slowly. That was the truth. Richard Lawson didn't just manage problems. He controlled narratives. And if he had decided this story mattered, then the world would hear it loudly. The landing gear lowered, the engine shifting pitch as the plane descended through a veil of gray clouds. The city of Paris emerged below, rooftops gleaming faintly in the pale morning light. The plane touched down smoothly, the cabin jolting with the finality of wheels on tarmac. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, the first-class passengers stirred, collecting belongings, checking their phones. But before anyone could rise, 2 men in dark suits boarded the aircraft through the jet bridge. They moved with crisp authority, their badges clipped discreetly to their belts. Without a word, they headed straight for the crew rest quarters. Minutes later, they emerged with Helen Whitmore between them. She clutched her handbag to her chest, her face pale. her eyes red from sleepless tears. She didn't look at the passengers. She didn't look at Marcus or Maya. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, walking stiffly as though each step cost her something. The cabin watched in silence. The Queen of the Isle, who had strutted with contempt hours earlier, now shuffled like cargo. Her reign was over, reduced to the walk of shame down the jet bridge. Marcus exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. Maya's chest tightened with conflicting emotions: relief, sorrow, exhaustion. Justice had been swift, but justice, she knew, was never truly complete. As they collected their bags and prepared to disembark, Marcus glanced at his sister. "This doesn't end here," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "No," she whispered. "This is just the beginning." The doors opened with a metallic hiss, and the first-class passengers filed off into the jet bridge, their faces bleary with travel, their clothes creased from the long overnight flight. The usual shuffle of deplaning carried a subdued edge. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something that would not stay sealed inside the aluminum walls of Flight 74. Marcus and Maya stepped into Charles de Gaulle Airport with their carry-ons in hand, walking side by side through the gleaming terminal. The scent of strong coffee and the murmur of arriving crowds surrounded them. Yet the moment they emerged past immigration, the illusion of anonymity dissolved. Flashes exploded like lightning. Cameras were raised. Reporters' voices pierced the air, sharp with urgency. "Mr. Carter, Miss Carter, can you confirm what happened on Flight 74? Is it true the head purser was fired mid-air for racist behavior? How does it feel to be at the center of a scandal that could shake Global Sky Airways?" Maya froze for a heartbeat. The questions hit like a physical force, waves breaking one after another. She had braced herself for attention, but not so soon, not so aggressively. The story had traveled faster than the jet itself. Marcus stepped slightly ahead, his hand hovering near her back in silent reassurance. He didn't push her forward. He simply positioned himself like a shield. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "No comment for now. Please respect our privacy." The reporters surged closer, undeterred, their cameras flashing. A wall of uniformed airport security appeared suddenly, guiding the twins through the chaos and into a private corridor. The crowd pressed against the ropes, shouting, but the sound dimmed as the heavy doors closed behind them. In the quiet, Marcus exhaled slowly. "That didn't take long," he murmured. Maya's hands tightened around the handle of her suitcase. "Richard must have moved faster than we thought. Someone leaked it." He nodded. "On purpose. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about the airline." They were escorted into a discreet lounge reserved for VIP arrivals. Inside, the world slowed again. Plush chairs, polished wood, the faint aroma of leather and espresso. A man in a tailored navy suit rose from one of the chairs as they entered. His salt and pepper hair was immaculate, his posture upright. Marcus, Maya. His voice was calm, deep, steady. Richard Lawson. For a moment, both twins were silent, seeing him here in Paris, waiting as though this had been planned all along, stripped away any lingering hope that the incident would fade quietly. Richard never moved without reason. If he was here, it meant the situation had already escalated far beyond the cabin of a single plane. "Richard," Maya said, her voice controlled but carrying a note of fatigue, "you came yourself." He nodded once. "Some things you delegate, some things you don't. Sit." They obeyed, setting their bags aside. Richard studied them, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "First," he said, "I'm proud of how you handled yourselves. Calm, composed, strategic. You gave them nothing to use against you. That alone has already shifted the narrative in your favor. Marcus leaned forward slightly. How bad is it? Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. By the time you landed, the story had already broken. Someone on board spoke to the press, perhaps that attorney, perhaps another passenger. It doesn't matter. The phrasing in the headlines is already brutal. Purser fired mid-air for racist remarks. Global Sky in turmoil at 35,000 feet. Maya closed her eyes briefly. The words sinking in. She could see them in her mind's eye. Bold headlines splashed across digital screens. Hashtags spreading like wildfire. Richard continued. The airline stock dropped 3% in pre-market trading this morning. Their PR team is scrambling. They've issued a vague apology, but it's too late. The story has momentum now, and the world has your names. Marcus frowned. Our names. We didn't release them. You didn't have to. Richard replied. Flight manifest leak. Witnesses talk. The internet connects dots quickly. By tomorrow, every outlet will have you front and center. Tech entrepreneurs targeted mid-air. Twins who built Nexus Innovations treated like they didn't belong in the seats they paid for. It's irresistible. Maya's stomach tightened. She hated the idea of being reduced to a headline. Their humanity flattened into a narrative that fit neatly into outrage cycles. Yet she also knew Richard was right. Their lives had prepared them for scrutiny. But this was different. This was raw, visceral, unplanned. What do we do? She asked softly. Richard's gaze hardened, though his voice remained calm. You don't chase the story. You lead it. You can't hide from this. It's already too big. So you speak. One interview, one outlet, controlled. You frame the incident not as personal humiliation, but as a lesson, a reflection of something larger. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You want us to make it about systemic prejudice, not just Helen. Exactly, Richard said. If you make it about her, it's a tragedy of one career. If you make it about dignity, respect, and the silent ways people are made to feel invisible, it becomes universal. It becomes unforgettable. Maya leaned back, her mind racing. She imagined the cameras, the microphones, the endless commentary. She imagined her words dissected, quoted, twisted, and yet she also saw the opportunity, a chance to turn pain into something more than survival, a chance to make it matter. Her chest tightened with conflicting emotions. She had not asked for this. She had wanted a celebration. But maybe life never gave you the stage you asked for. It gave you the one you were meant to stand on. She glanced at Marcus. His eyes met hers. A silent conversation passed between them, the same language they'd shared since childhood. He gave a slight nod. She exhaled slowly. We'll do it, she said. Richard's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Good. I've already arranged for a journalist in Paris. Someone credible, respectful. You'll sit down tomorrow morning. Until then, rest. The world is waiting for you to speak, but you control the moment. For the first time since stepping onto the plane in New York, Maya felt a strange sense of clarity. The storm was raging, yes, but they weren't powerless. They had weathered worse. They could turn this. As they left the lounge hours later and drove into the gray drizzle of Paris, Marcus stared out the car window at the blur of cobblestone streets and centuries-old buildings. His reflection in the glass was calm, but his thoughts churned. Do you think this will change anything? Maya asked quietly beside him. He didn't answer immediately. The city rolled past in silence. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes steady. Maybe not the world, he said, but maybe enough of it. The car moved on, carrying them deeper into Paris, deeper into the storm they hadn't asked for, but could no longer escape. The morning in Paris was soft and gray, the kind of light that muted everything into pale shades of silver, from their suite overlooking the Seine. Marcus and Maya sat across a small breakfast table, untouched croissants and coffee cooling between them. Neither had much appetite. Today wasn't about food. Today was about voice. The night before, Richard Lawson had left them with a single instruction: be yourselves. The world doesn't need fire. It needs truth, and you have plenty of it. Maya had barely slept. She'd stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying Helen Whitmore's words in her head like a broken record. You people, back of the bus. Each syllable cut fresh, raw grooves into her memory. It wasn't just about that flight. It was about every boardroom where she'd been mistaken for an assistant, every pitch where her intelligence had been questioned before her brothers, every quiet dismissal hidden behind a smile. By morning, she knew what she would say. The interview was set in a discreet Parisian office neutral ground, professional but warm. Cameras were arranged carefully, lights soft and flattering. The journalist waiting for them was Elise Durant, a respected figure in European media known for her empathy as much as her rigor. She stood as they entered, offering her hand. Marcus. Maya, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Her voice was calm, carrying no edge of sensationalism. Already. Maya felt a sliver of relief. They sat, microphones discreetly clipped to their jackets. The hum of equipment filled the room, but the space felt strangely intimate, as if it were only the three of them. Elise leaned forward slightly, her notepad closed, her pen idle. I know this is not the reason you came to Paris, she began softly. You came here to celebrate a major achievement. Instead, you found yourselves in the center of something painful. I want to start simply. How are you both doing this morning? Maya inhaled slowly. Tired, she admitted, her voice gentle but steady, but clear. We know why we're here. We know what happened, and we know it's not just about us. Marcus nodded. We're not victims of an isolated incident. We're participants in a larger truth, one many people live every day. Yesterday, it just happened to be visible at 35,000 feet. Elise allowed silence to follow his words, letting them resonate. Then she asked, can you walk me through what happened on Flight 74? From the beginning? And so, calmly, Marcus began. He described the difference in greetings, the selective blindness, the skipped services. He recited the details like entries in a ledger, the towels, the drinks, the meals. His voice never rose, never trembled. It was the voice of a man used to boardrooms, used to presenting data with clarity. Maya added the texture, the silence that felt like erasure, the deliberate choices that cut deeper than mistakes. Her voice wove emotion into the record Marcus laid down, transforming facts into lived experience. Elise listened intently, her eyes never leaving theirs. And then, she said softly, came the words none of us ever want to hear in our lifetime. Maya met her gaze directly. She told us this was first class, not the back of the bus, that she didn't know how we could afford to be there. She said she was treating us exactly as we deserved. Maya's voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. The quiet precision of her words carried more power than fury ever could. For a moment, Elise looked down, her throat working as though swallowing her own emotion. When she looked back up, her eyes shone. And in that moment, what did you feel? Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely. It wasn't shock, he said. We've lived too much life to be shocked. It was recognition. The recognition of a pattern we've seen before, in different forms. The difference was this time, we had witnesses. This time, people couldn't look away. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the lights. Elise didn't interrupt. She let their words breathe. Finally, Maya added quietly, we didn't want revenge. We wanted dignity. That's all. And when you have to fight for dignity in spaces where it should be automatic, that fight itself becomes exhausting. Elise tapped her pen against the closed notepad, her voice thoughtful. You've both built a company that has changed industries. You've negotiated with some of the most powerful people in the world. And yet, in that cabin, you were made to feel small. What does that tell us about where we are as a society? Marcus's voice was steady. It tells us that power and prejudice can occupy the same space, that no amount of success insulates you from bias. And it tells us that progress isn't just about laws or policies. It's about how people choose to see or not see one another, moment by moment, Maya added. It tells us that invisible battles are still being fought in plain sight, that the cost of prejudice isn't always loud. It's in the quiet ways people are erased, ignored, dismissed. But silence doesn't erase reality. It only delays accountability. Elise nodded slowly, her expression grave. And what would you say to those who might minimize this, who say, perhaps, that it was just one flight attendant having a bad day? Maya's lips pressed together. Then she spoke with deliberate calm. One person's words revealed something bigger. If you dismiss it as a bad day, you're telling people like us to swallow indignities over and over, to normalize being treated as less. We won't do that anymore. We can't, because every time we stay silent, the cycle continues. The interview stretched on, weaving through details, reflections, and moments of striking vulnerability. Marcus spoke of their parents' lessons, how character was the only currency that truly mattered. Maya spoke of the internal war she fought between anger and composure, how silence had been both her shield and her burden. By the time Elise thanked them and the cameras powered down, the room felt heavy with the weight of what had been shared. Yet in that heaviness was also something else, a spark, a clarity that this story, once released, would no longer belong only to them. That night, when the interview aired, the reaction was immediate. Clips spread across social media, subtitled in multiple languages within hours. Maya's calm repetition of Helen's words went viral. Marcus's description of invisible prejudice resonated in boardrooms and living rooms alike. The world was listening. Justice, at 3,000 to 5,000 feet, trended globally. Editorials appeared within hours, calling it a watershed moment for both the airline industry and corporate accountability. Some passengers from the flight even came forward publicly, corroborating the twins' account. Thomas Bennett released a formal statement, lending his credibility as a retired attorney. And amid the storm, Marcus and Maya sat in their suite, watching the world reflect their truth back at them. Neither smiled, neither celebrated. They simply sat side by side, silent companions in a moment larger than themselves. "This isn't ours anymore," Maya whispered. Marcus nodded. "No, but maybe that's the point." While Marcus and Maya sat quietly in their Paris suite, the real tremors of Flight 74 were being felt thousands of miles away. In New York, the headquarters of Global Sky Airways was lit up long before dawn. Executives had been dragged from their beds by urgent calls, emails with subject lines in all caps. Crisis management, immediate response required, flooded inboxes. By 7 a.m, the boardroom on the 37th floor was packed. A dozen executives sat in high-backed chairs around a gleaming mahogany table, their faces grim. At the head sat CEO Jonathan Pierce, his tie hastily knotted, his eyes bloodshot. Beside him, the chief communications officer scrolled frantically through her tablet, reading headlines aloud. Purser fired midair over racist outburst. Global Sky Airways in freefall. Passengers speak out after shocking discrimination scandal. She looked up, her voice tight. We're in every major outlet. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. You name it, it's everywhere. The CFO spoke next, his tone flat but heavy. Stock is down 6% since market open. That's billions in valuation. Shareholders are already calling. A murmur rippled around the table. Panic mixed with anger. They had weathered crises before: mechanical failures, delayed rollouts, even safety investigations. But this was different. This was moral. And morality was far harder to spin. Jonathan rubbed his temples. What about the employee? The head of HR cleared her throat. Helen Whitmore, 20-year veteran, strong union backing historically. She's had complaints before: rudeness, selective service, but nothing formally substantiated. Until now, Jonathan snapped. She was terminated in flight by Captain Price. The HR head said quickly, effective immediately. Security escorted her off in Paris. She's gone. The COO leaned forward, his voice sharp. Gone. That's it. You think that ends it? This isn't just about one purser anymore. This is about culture, about whether Global Sky tolerates bias in its most premium cabin. People are asking how she survived complaints for years, why we let this happen at all. Silence hung heavy. They all knew the truth. Helen wasn't an outlier. She was an open secret, a symptom of problems they had chosen not to confront, because she was senior, because she was union protected, because admitting fault had always been costlier than burying it. Now, the cost of burying it was here, and it was astronomical. The chief communications officer broke the silence. The twins are the story now. Marcus and Maya Carter, founders of Luminar Technologies. They're not just passengers. They're billionaires, role models, public figures. Their interview with Elise Durant aired last night. It's already been viewed 20 million times. She tapped her screen, and Maya's voice played through the speakers. The price of a ticket should be the only qualification required for dignity, not the color of your skin. The words rang through the sterile boardroom like a verdict. Jonathan exhaled sharply. We're finished if we don't control this. What's our plan? The CCO shifted uncomfortably. We've issued a statement apologizing for the incident, reiterating our commitment to diversity and inclusion. It's meaningless. The COO cut in. People can smell corporate boilerplate a mile away. They want accountability. They want blood. And they might get it. The HR head muttered. The union's already distancing themselves. They've withdrawn support for Whitmore. That alone is telling. If they thought she had a chance, they'd be defending her. They know she's indefensible. The CFO's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then paled. Shareholder lawsuit. Class action forming. Claiming reputational damage due to failure to enforce anti-discrimination policies. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. God damn it! The executives exchanged nervous glances. Global Sky was no stranger to lawsuits. But this was different. This was moral outrage wrapped in legal teeth. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in a modest suburban home in New Jersey, Helen Whitmore sat at her kitchen table, staring at the glow of her phone. Her inbox overflowed with messages, some hateful, some supportive, all invasive. Reporters camped outside her house. Her name, once known only among airline circles, now blazed across headlines worldwide. She scrolled furiously, clinging to narratives that painted her as a victim. Purser scapegoated for corporate failings. 20-year veteran destroyed over misunderstanding. The comments beneath, though, were merciless. Thousands of strangers dissecting her words, condemning her actions. Helen's hand shook. She muttered to herself, "I'm not racist. I was just doing my job." They twisted it. But even as she said it, the echo of her own voice returned to her. Back of the bus, she squeezed her eyes shut. The words wouldn't leave. Back in Paris, Marcus and Maya's faces appeared on morning news programs. Clips of their interview looped endlessly. Commentators debated not whether Helen was guilty, her own words had sealed that, but what it meant for the airline industry, for corporate culture, for society at large. One commentator put it bluntly on a primetime broadcast: if Marcus and Maya Carter, two of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the world, can be treated this way in first class, what does that say about how ordinary passengers are treated every day? The question landed like a hammer. It reframed the scandal from an isolated incident to a systemic indictment. Suddenly, every airline was under scrutiny. At Global Sky headquarters, the crisis team debated strategy late into the night. Some argued for compensation packages, others for sweeping diversity reforms, others still for sacrificing more executives to appease the public. Jonathan Pierce listened, his face a mask of fatigue. Finally, he spoke. "We need to meet with the Carters. Publicly, personally. No more press releases. No more boilerplate. I want cameras there when I apologize. It's the only way." The room went silent. No CEO wanted to bow publicly to passengers, no matter how powerful. But Jonathan knew the truth. He wasn't bowing to passengers. He was bowing to Richard Lawson, the man behind them. By midnight in New York, the decision was made. Global Sky Airways would request a face-to-face meeting with Marcus and Maya Carter in Paris. It would be broadcast live. It would be the company's attempt at survival. And in their Paris hotel, as the city lights reflected off the Seine, Maya looked at her brother with weary eyes. "It's bigger than us now," she whispered. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. It always was. The ballroom of the Hôtel La Rivière in Paris had been transformed overnight into a stage. Rows of cameras faced a sleek table set at the center, spotlights bathing the space in a white glow. Behind the table, a simple backdrop bore the Global Sky Airways logo, flanked by two discreet European flags. The press gathered like vultures, their microphones pointed forward, their murmurs a low, electric hum. They weren't here for an ordinary press conference. They were here for something far rarer, a corporate giant bowing publicly to its customers. Marcus and Maya arrived side by side, dressed in tailored black suits that projected both elegance and restraint. They carried no notes, no scripts. They didn't need them. Their story was already carved into memory. Jonathan Pierce, the CEO of Global Sky, stood waiting at the table, his shoulders stiff beneath his tailored suit. His face was pale, his eyes heavy. This was a man who had spent the last 48 hours in a storm, dragged across continents by a scandal of his own making. As Marcus and Maya approached, Pierce extended his hand. Marcus shook it firmly, Maya with measured politeness. There was no warmth in the gesture, only formality. Cameras flashed as the three sat down. The room hushed. The moderator, a neutral French broadcaster, spoke first. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending today. Global Sky Airways addresses the incident that occurred on Flight 74 from New York to Paris. Present are CEO Jonathan Pierce and passengers Marcus and Maya Carter. This meeting will be broadcast live worldwide. The words were barely finished before Jonathan leaned toward the microphone. His voice was steady, rehearsed, but edged with something more fear. On behalf of Global Sky Airways, I want to offer my deepest and most sincere apologies to Mr. and Miss Carter for the treatment they endured aboard Flight 74. What happened was unacceptable. It was discriminatory, and it does not reflect the values of this company. Cameras clicked furiously. The CEO continued, his tone climbing toward contrition. The purser involved has been terminated. We are launching an internal review of our service protocols and our diversity training programs. We are committed to ensuring that no passenger, regardless of background, ever experiences such treatment again. He exhaled, a rehearsed line delivered, a box checked. The eyes of the world now shifted to Marcus and Maya. Marcus leaned forward first, his voice low but resonant, carrying clearly through the microphones. We appreciate the apology, Mr. Pierce, but let's be honest. This isn't about one flight attendant. This is about a culture that allowed her to thrive for 20 years. This is about passengers of color who didn't have the resources, or the witnesses, or the influence we had. People who were dismissed, ignored, or humiliated with no cameras watching. We're here today not for ourselves, but for them. The room went still. Even the clicking of cameras slowed. Maya spoke next, her tone calm but cutting. Your purser told us, and I quote, "This is first class, not the back of the bus." Those words were not just offensive. They were a window into a mindset that believes some people don't belong in certain spaces, no matter what they've earned or paid for. That mindset doesn't start and end with her. It starts and ends with the culture you create and tolerate. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Maya continued, her eyes fixed on him. We didn't want champagne. We didn't want special treatment. We wanted the same courtesy given freely to the passengers around us. That's what dignity is, equal respect. If your airline can't provide that without being forced into a crisis, then your apology means very little. The words cut sharper than any headline. The press scribbled furiously, cameras zooming in on her steady gaze. Jonathan cleared his throat. Miss Carter, I understand your frustration, but I assure you, we are taking concrete steps, Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but immovable. With respect, Mr. Pierce, frustration isn't the word. What happened was not frustrating. It was degrading. And what you're describing, statements, protocols, training, they're not solutions. They're patches. The solution is accountability at every level, for every passenger, not when the world is watching, every single day. A ripple of murmurs moved through the press row. Some journalists nodded. Others whispered into their recorders. Jonathan looked cornered, but he forced a nod. Accountability, he echoed. Yes, that will be the foundation of our reforms. Maya leaned closer to her microphone, her voice soft but deliberate. Then prove it. Don't just promise change, document it. Make it transparent. Make it measurable. If your commitment is real, you won't hide your progress behind closed doors. You'll invite the world to see it. The CEO's silence stretched. He was not used to being challenged. Not like this. Certainly not on live television. But he also knew the cameras were merciless. The Carters weren't just passengers anymore. They were symbols. To resist them was to resist justice itself. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his words heavy. You're right. Transparency will be part of our reforms. We will publish quarterly reports on our progress, and I will personally oversee them. It wasn't triumph the twins felt in that moment. It was exhaustion. This wasn't a victory lap. It was labor. The labor of forcing acknowledgement. The labor of dragging truth into the light. The moderator stepped in, her voice formal again. Thank you. We will now open the floor to brief questions from the press. Hand shot up immediately. Mr. Pierce, will Global Sky compensate the Carters? Marcus Maya, do you plan to sue the airline? Do you believe this incident represents wider racism in corporate culture? Maya raised a hand gently. The room fell silent. We are not here for a payout. We are not here to sue. We are here because silence perpetuates cycles. Our dignity isn't for sale. What we want is simple for the next passenger who looks like us, who doesn't have cameras waiting at the gate, to be treated with the same respect as anyone else. If this scandal makes that more likely, then the pain of Flight 74 will not have been wasted. The words landed like thunder. Some journalists lowered their pens, as though even writing them would dilute their force. Jonathan Pierce bowed his head slightly, his hands clenched on the table. On behalf of this airline, I hear you, and I promise you we will change. The conference ended with more flashes, more noise, more questions shouted into the air. But as Marcus and Maya left the ballroom, the clamor faded behind them. Outside, Paris awaited, the Seine flowing as it always had, indifferent to human storms. In the car, back to their hotel, Maya leaned her head against the window. Her voice was quiet, almost to herself. Do you think he meant it? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He watched the blur of Parisian streets, the reflection of his own face in the glass. Finally, he said, it doesn't matter if he meant it. What matters is now the world expects it. And that, they both knew, was the real reckoning. The morning after the televised reckoning, the world felt different. Headlines screamed across every major newspaper, across every glowing phone screen, across every evening broadcast. Carters confront Global Sky dignity is not for sale. From Silicon Valley to the Sky's Twins Force. Reckoning on discrimination. Global Sky Airways vows. Reform after explosive meeting in Paris. Clips from the conference flooded social media. Marcus's calm demand for accountability. Maya's quiet but piercing words. Our dignity isn't for sale. The sound bites traveled faster than the airline's jets, reaching millions within hours. Hashtags trended in multiple languages. Warrant justice at the 5,000 feet. Dignity in the skies. Never invisible again. In coffee shops, offices, and living rooms. The conversation was the same. Passengers swapped stories of subtle humiliations, the times they had felt unseen. Employees in service industries confessed how bias shaped the way they were treated at work. Parents told their children that the Carters had spoken for them, too. It was no longer a story about one airline. It had become a mirror. At Global Sky's New York headquarters, the fallout was merciless. The company's stock continued to tumble, losing nearly 10% in 2 days. Analysts debated whether the damage was temporary or catastrophic. Shareholders demanded resignations. Jonathan Pierce spent endless hours in damage control meetings. The board, once deferential, now turned sharp. Why did it take billionaires with cameras to expose this? How many complaints were buried before who knew who looked away? The questions clawed at every executive. Some denied knowledge. Others pointed fingers. A culture of silence had cracked open, and what spilled out was ugly. Meanwhile, Helen Whitmore sat in the dim light of her suburban home, the blinds drawn tight. Outside, reporters still loitered, their vans parked like vultures waiting for her to step out. She hadn't, not in days. Her phone buzzed with messages she refused to open, former colleagues distancing themselves, old friends offering half-hearted pity, strangers hurling insults. She turned on the television and instantly regretted it. There she was, plastered across the screen, her face frozen mid-sneer, her voice replayed endlessly. This is first class, not the back of the bus. The clip had become a symbol, her words a rallying cry against her. Helen muttered to herself, over and over, "It wasn't racist. I was under pressure. They provoked me. They twisted it." But even as the excuses left her lips, she knew they rang hollow. Her career was gone, her pension tied up in legal battles, her name synonymous with disgrace. And still, the Carters' voices played everywhere, calm, dignified, unbreakable. Each time she heard them, the hollow inside her grew. Back in Paris, Marcus and Maya moved through the city with deliberate discretion. They declined interview requests, skipped crowded events, kept to quiet dinners and long walks by the Seine. But anonymity was gone. Wherever they went, people recognized them. Some approached shyly, thanking them. Others clapped softly as they passed. At first, it unsettled them. Neither had sought celebrity of this kind. But as the days went on, they began to see the pattern. People didn't just admire them for their success. They needed them, needed their story as proof that dignity could be demanded and won. One evening, Richard Lawson joined them for dinner in a private salon overlooking the river. His expression, as always, was calm, but the weight of strategy shimmered beneath. "You realize," he said between sips of wine, "you've become more than entrepreneurs now?" Maya tilted her head. "Symbols, you mean?" Richard nodded. "Symbols of grace under fire, of accountability, and symbols, once created, take on lives of their own." Marcus leaned back, his voice thoughtful. "We never wanted that role. We just wanted to celebrate our deal." "That's the irony," Richard replied. "History doesn't ask permission. It chooses its moments. You can either run from it, or you can shape it." Maya looked out the window at the glowing river, her reflection faint in the glass. "And if we shape it, what then do we become spokespeople for every injustice?" Every headline Richard's voice softened, though his eyes never lost their steel. "You don't have to fight every battle, but sometimes, by fighting one, you light a torch that others can carry." Silence lingered, filled only by the hum of Paris beyond the glass. That night, Maya lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. Inside her chest was a storm. Part of her longed for peace, for the quiet life she and Marcus had built together, a life of innovation, boardrooms, creation. But another part whispered that maybe this was their calling, too. Maybe their story could be more than pain. It could be power. Across the hall, Marcus sat at his desk, scrolling through the flood of emails pouring into Luminar Technologies. Messages from young engineers thanking them for speaking out. Notes from employees in hospitality sharing their own stories. Letters from strangers saying they now felt seen. He read them quietly, one by one, until his eyes blurred with fatigue. Then he closed the laptop and whispered into the silence. "We can't carry all of this, but maybe we can carry enough." Meanwhile, the world moved quickly. Advocacy groups seized the moment, calling for stronger anti-discrimination policies in airlines and beyond. Lawmakers raised questions in Parliament and Congress. Airline unions braced for reforms. And through it all, the Carters' names remained at the center. In New Jersey, Helen finally left her house one night, slipping out under cover of darkness. She walked to a small cafe, hood pulled over her face, hoping no one would notice, but she couldn't escape herself. On the cafe's mounted TV, Maya's interview replayed with French subtitles. Customers watched intently. Some nodded in agreement. Some wiped at their eyes. Helen sank lower in her chair, the bitter coffee turning to ash in her mouth. The world had moved on from her, but it hadn't forgotten. She was the cautionary tale now, the shadow to their light. Back in Paris, as dawn painted the sky pink, Marcus and Maya stood on their hotel balcony. The city stretched before them, alive and humming. "We didn't choose this," Maya whispered. Marcus's arm brushed hers. "No, but maybe it chose us." And as the morning bells tolled across Paris, they both knew that the fallout of Flight 74 was only the beginning of something far larger than themselves. 6 months had passed since Flight 74. The scandal that once dominated every headline had faded into the wider churn of news cycles. Other stories had taken its place: political turmoil, new technologies, cultural controversies. Yet for those who had lived it, the echoes remained. For Marcus and Maya Carter, life had accelerated. Luminar Technologies expanded across Europe, its software quietly steering the supply chains of global giants. Investors treated the siblings not just as business leaders, but as icons. Their faces appeared on magazine covers, their names spoken in speeches about resilience, dignity, and leadership. And yet, neither Marcus nor Maya forgot the hum of that cabin, the burn of Helen's words, the way silence from others had cut as deep as insult itself. Success had not erased the memory. It had sharpened it. On the other side of the Atlantic, Helen Whitmore's world had shrunk to a small, gray apartment in Newark, New Jersey. Gone was the suburban house she once called home. Mortgage unpaid. She had been forced to sell. Gone were her friends in the airline industry, colleagues who once laughed with her during long layovers. None returned her calls. She spent her days pacing the confines of her apartment, scrolling endlessly through news archives, reliving her downfall. The story would not die. Every anniversary of the incident brought a new wave of commentary, think pieces, and retrospectives, and always, always her name. She tried to fight back once. With dwindling savings, she hired a lawyer to file a wrongful termination suit, but it collapsed almost instantly. Witnesses lined up against her. Video evidence, leaked by passengers, showed her sneering face, her cutting words. The court dismissed it, and she was left with debt and humiliation. It was in this darkness that Helen clung to one last hope. She poured what little she had into a business plan she had dreamed of for years: a cafe. A small, elegant space where she could control everything: the decor, the clientele, the tone. She called it the daily grind. For months, she scribbled notes, drew diagrams, and convinced herself that this was her redemption. All she needed was a loan. And so, dressed in the same severe button navy suit she had once worn proudly in first-class cabins, Helen walked into the Manhattan offices of Kensington Lawson Capital, a firm known for investing in new ventures. She carried her portfolio like a lifeline. She sat in the waiting area, rehearsing her lines. A new chapter, a new start. Everyone deserves one. The receptionist smiled politely and escorted her into a glass-walled office overlooking the skyline. Helen's breath caught. The view was breathtaking, the kind of view that screamed power. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, forcing confidence into her bones. The door opened. A man in a tailored suit entered, his steps calm, assured. He took his place behind the desk, the city glowing behind him. Helen's heart stopped. Marcus Carter. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The memory hit her like turbulent seat 2A. His calm face turned toward her as she dismissed him, as she told him he didn't belong. Now here he was, across the desk, holding her future in his hands. "Miss Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice even, measured, unshakable. "Thank you for coming in." Her mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but only a croak escaped. She forced herself to nod, to place the portfolio on the desk. Marcus opened it briefly, flipping through pages. Then he looked up, his gaze steady. "Tell me about your vision, about the daily grind." Helen's voice trembled. "I want to create a refined space. Quality coffee, artisanal pastries, a certain atmosphere, a place for people who appreciate standards." Marcus's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Standards." He let the word hang in the air. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Helen swallowed hard. "Professionals, families, people who want something better than the ordinary." Marcus leaned back, folding his hands, so it would be inclusive, welcoming to everyone in the community. She hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Of course." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he leaned forward, his tone sharpened, not with anger, but with precision. 6 months ago, you had a chance to demonstrate inclusivity. You had a chance to extend dignity, the simplest form of respect, to 2 passengers who had earned their seats as much as anyone else. You chose the opposite. You chose exclusion, contempt, disdain. Helen's throat closed. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. "I've read your business plan. On its financials alone, it wouldn't survive 6 months. But even if it were flawless, even if it were the best plan I had ever seen, the answer would still be no. Because character is the foundation of every business, and you forfeited yours at 35,000 feet. The words landed like a verdict. Helen wilted in her chair, her last hope slipping away. Marcus closed the portfolio, sliding it back across the desk. "We don't invest in racists. Miss Whitmore, it's the worst investment anyone could ever make." Helen flinched at the word, racist. She had spent months telling herself she wasn't, that it was stress, misunderstanding, exaggeration. But now, hearing it spoken aloud with calm certainty, something inside her crumbled. She stood shakily, gathering her things. Marcus rose and walked to the door, holding it open. His professionalism was the final cruelty. No shouting, no gloating, just calm dismissal. "The assistant will validate your parking," he said softly. "Good day, Miss Whitmore." Helen walked out into the bustling office, past young, diverse employees typing at desks, collaborating in glass rooms, laughing together. She kept her eyes low, her steps heavy. The walk felt endless. When the elevator doors closed, she finally looked up. In the mirrored steel, she saw herself older, smaller, broken. The world had left her behind. Outside, New York roared with life, but for Helen, there was nothing left. Back in Paris, Marcus and Maya stood on a balcony overlooking the city as twilight fell. The scandal was behind them now, but its lessons lingered. Maya turned to her brother. "Do you ever wonder if it was all worth it?" Marcus's gaze swept over the city lights. "Worth it isn't the right word. Necessary is." Maya nodded slowly. "And now. Marcus said, we keep building for ourselves and for the ones who come after." The two stood in silence, the hum of Paris beneath them, the sky wide above. They hadn't asked to be symbols, but they had become them anyway. And sometimes the world needed symbols. At 35,000 feet, two siblings were denied dignity, but they responded with strength, patience, and undeniable truth. Marcus and Maya Carter turned humiliation into history. They reminded us that prejudice is never about one word, one action, or one person. It's about the culture we allow to grow in silence. Helen Whitmore thought she had the power to decide who belonged in first class. In the end, she lost not only her career but the very future she dreamed of. Because dignity is not optional, it cannot be rationed, and it cannot be withheld without consequence. This story leaves us with a choice. Will we allow invisible prejudice to keep cutting people down? Or will we demand accountability and compassion in every space we enter? The Carters didn't seek to be symbols, but their grace under fire proved that the strongest response to hate is not anger, it is truth, delivered with unshakable resolve. If this story moved you, if you believe in dignity for every human being, help us spread the message. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice, humanity, and the moments that change lives forever.